Because that's a Fugazi. All right?
That's a Fugazi? How do you know it's a Fugazi? You looked at it for 2 seconds.
Well, it's a fake.
Yeah, I know what a Fugazi is.
It's all a Fugazi. You know what a Fugazi is?
Fugazi, it's fake.
Yeah, Fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust. It doesn't.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi.
All right, so I've been wanting to talk to Tim Copeland, the editor out at Decrypt, for quite a long time, and really finding an excuse was sort of the impetus here, catalyst, and what prompted me at this time around to reach out to him was an essay, a longer form essay that he's put out there, an article, an investigation, really kind of a throwback to a kind of journalism that isn't done in crypto to the extent I think it should be, what I guess we'll loosely call a long read. But it's featured at Decrypt, which we'll link to in the show notes out at decrypt.co. It's called STEEM vs. TRON, the rebellion against the cryptocurrency empire. It's a saga. It's got characters. It's literary, it's cinematic, it's hilarious, and sad and profound all at the same time. And Tim has managed to capture all of it. But before we dive too far into that and Decrypt and things, Tim Copeland, Tim, man, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Hey, well, it's nice to be here.
You're based in the UK, right?
Yeah, man, I'm in London. We've got a bit of a team over here. We try and cover the news as it get stories that break as New York wakes up, and then we also have coverage across the rest of the US and the rest of the world. Decrypt
is relatively new. I guess it's been around for a couple of years, right? You guys come out of the ConsenSys, Joe Lubin hub and spoke model.
So we started just over 2 years ago. Yeah, I think we had the anniversary of our first post just a couple of weeks back, which was pretty crazy to see kind of how we've come in those 2 years. Like I still remember just when nobody had heard of us and our site looked like a blog post. And it's crazy to think where we are now. Yeah, so we are funded by ConsenSys, but we're editorially independent. We don't have a whole load of interaction with them. But yeah, I mean, so I chatted to Joe once and he's very enthusiastic about what we're doing and about our ability just to report independently on the news. So yeah, it's pretty cool where we are right now.
It has been an amazing run to watch you guys grow and blossom. I think what initially caught my eye was the evolution of the layout and how you have this really nice aesthetic that you keep, and you really, as a reader, you really, I guess, cater to the reader, which is kind of a cliche, but you really do. Like, you link to all the relevant sources, but you also have backgrounds, these almost like little playing cards off to the side. You now have an app. You have a token, or you're going to, I guess, have a token, a podcast. There's a newsletter. You do all sort of the hot button stories, sort of the new thing, and the quick takes and the press releases, but you also do these longer forms. How would you, other than what I just said, kind of distinguish Decrypt from some of your competition in the crypto media world?
Yeah, so our vision here, and you kind of see it with our name, is to decrypt the decentralized web, to basically make what's super complex and super complicated, and to make it simple and accessible and understandable for anyone, really. So our main kind of goal is just to try and explain things as easy and as simple as possible. So we have like lots of little things, like we have these little definition words where if you hover over certain words that, particularly like technical words, they pop up with a little definition. And that's all designed to help people who are new to crypto or not even in crypto whatsoever understand what we're talking about. And in terms of kind of, so kind of design of the site, that's all down to James. He's just an incredible designer. And then in terms of kind of the content, we have an incredible kind of editorial background. So Josh Quitner was an editor at Time magazine for many years. Matt Hussey was an editor at Wired. And they've kind of brought this really strong editorial quality to our team, and that's forced everyone, like me included. I mean, I was pretty fresh when I started, and they've taught me a lot of things. And then with the technology, obviously, and another of our co-founders, Ryan, he was a co-founder of Code Academy. So he's got this kind of incredible technical background, and that's why we're able to do things, have the site that kind of looks pretty, but we also have, really cool tech built in. And I think you're definitely going to see that with our app, which is live in both the App Store and the Play Store now. And yeah, obviously the kind of token thing will be coming soonish.
It's awesome. It really is a distinguished, differentiating new form on kind of an old idea in terms of media, and I think you guys have gotten it just about right. There's the CoinDesks and the Block and some of these others that I would consider you guys to be peers of, but there's a little bit more oomph in Decrypt. There's a little bit more, I guess, panache. I'm kind of groping. I really knew what I wanted to say before we started recording, but I'm trying not to flatter you too much and just be completely honest in the fact that Decrypt just goes about it differently. They do kind of on the surface a lot of the same things the other sites do, but they just add a little bit more to it. There's some care there, and you guys cover the entire space. I've seen everything from venture capitalist stuff and kind of the usual mover and shakers to scene coverage, deep dives into some of the characters, and one of my favorite early columnists, essayists, writers that you guys had was Ben Munster. I thought I saw that Ben returned briefly to Decrypt, or said he was going to start writing for it again. Whatever happened to him?
So Ben, he's kind of been around for a couple of years. So he started when I started. He was also in London. We're pretty close friends, but he's always had a very different style of writing to me. And we just kind of approach everything a little bit differently. So he got a
Hunter S. Thompson vibe. So like when I first ran into him and when Decrypt hit my radar, was his profile of just left my mind now. But
Dudas? Like Dudas?
No, the Dudas one was hilarious. But it was shortly before Dudas. It was the porn site where he goes out to Los Angeles and does a deep dive into porn and say it again.
Spank Chain.
Spank Chain. That's what it was. Yeah. And man, was that fantastic! But he's got that kind of I guess Hunter S. Thompson vibe. But anyway, so is he kind of coming back to Decrypt, or has he kind of fully left?
Sure. Yeah. No. So that Spank Chain piece was pretty fantastic. That was one of our very early day pieces. We sent him over to the Spank house, and he just lived there for a few days. Yeah. I mean, Ben has always kind of incredible potential with his writing. He's definitely a better writer than I am. He wrote a piece for Esquire recently. And also wrote a long piece for CoinDesk as well. So basically, he's sort of freelancing now. I don't quite know what his kind of plan is. But yeah, I think, I mean, he kind of did this piece on Chainlink recently for us. So he's still around. Yeah, still doing stuff.
Good stuff. And that's, again, just a taste of what Decrypt brings. I just don't think a writer like Munster or even yourself could find a place in some of these other platforms where they're allowed to kind of let their hair down and really dive into a topic. So I didn't want to give Ben too much credit here and turn the podcast into, but he is something that he was something that attracted me to Decrypt. So let's go a little bit into your background then. How do you get to Decrypt? How do you kind of find crypto?
Sure, man. So I was kind of a classic 2017 boomer. it just got me super interested in it, and I was just suddenly I was reading everything there was to know about it. And I had a journalism course booked at the Press Association in London, and I knew that was to start in, I think, February 2018. So I knew I had that coming up, and I was just kind of working some dead end jobs to save up for that. And I was I found it fascinating. So I ended up, I had to write out, because I was reading so much into my head. I was just kind of had to write a lot of it out. So I set up my own website. I think it was bitcoinnoise.co.uk, as a very weak pun on Bitcoin news. And I just started writing out very simple and probably pretty terrible if I look back at them now, articles on crypto. And then when I did the journalism course, I ended up writing for just a couple of sites in my spare time. Not that I had much spare time on the course, but I wrote for a few sites. I think co-vesting was my first one. That was just kind of part of like a exchange or something. Ended up, I think, News BDC by the kind of end of it. But long story short, the money I earned doing that over the 4 months was kind of enough to pay my rent for the following month out of the course after I finished the course. So instead of kind of trying to find a quick job just to kind of keep living in London, I was able to. I knew I had like a 1 month buffer, so I tried just starting out freelance. I was like, give it a go. You can't do this in the mainstream world, but in crypto, like, anything's possible. So I just started freelancing for about 5 sites. I got a cheap co-working space, and I would just kind of travel there and then do the freelancing. And it was, I really enjoyed it. I like the independence. I had kind of control over my job. I could see how much money was coming in, and I could I made it work. And then I just heard about this job from a friend who studied at City University, and I just thought, give it a shot, see if I get it. They wanted to hire me, so I started working there, and now I'm sure they definitely regret hiring me. It's been 2 years. Yeah, I mean that's kind of where we are now, I think.
So you, after some journalism classes, you begin writing for Decrypt, and the site takes off. I've seen it cited by some pretty heavy hitters, and it's gotten a lot of recognition. Is there it seems obvious, but is there an overt emphasis on, at times, highlighting some very long pieces? I mean, is that something that the Decrypt team really wanted to emphasize?
I don't know about that. I think it's more we just really enjoy big, deep dives and long features. I think it's especially, like, obviously Josh. He was one editor at Time magazine for a while, but he also has written these huge features in the past. He's a phenomenal writer. Some of his things he's written for Wired as well. And yeah, he absolutely loves features, and I think we've just always had that mentality from the beginning. Adriana, one of our staff writers, she likes long form content, and has done a number of our features. And personally, I'm just a huge fan of just I love investigative pieces that kind of really go above and beyond into what really happened, especially on really crypto heavy things. I'm just kind of one of the kind of crypto obsessed people. So STEEM, I just found absolutely fascinating. It's just such a complex thing, and it's also intimately tied in with how this type of blockchain works. That that was the main reason why I wanted to cover it. But yeah, we just kind of, we like doing features, and I think we add a lot to the industry by doing it. And I think it's something that's particularly kind of done elsewhere. I think it's one of the things that kind of stands out for us.
Totally agree.
And it's definitely something that I enjoy.
Yeah, it really is wonderful to see an issue and a story served rather than kind of cut off and you're left with all these wandering questions. So it's really kudos to Decrypt for doing that, because I think the space has, at least thus far, rewarded kind of quicker hits So it's nice to see Decrypt take a chance on that and really dive into to Meteor stories. And so that definitely leads us to Steem, as you hinted at here. What, you know, I know a little bit about the background of Steem. I was kind of involved in the beginning of it, using it. But what sort of set off your alarm bells to go, okay, this is something I need to cover, and I need to go in depth? What led you there?
Be hard to pin down. So I actually wasn't particularly aware of the Steem situation as it evolved. I think we had a writer, Greg, who was he was more aware of it than I was, and I think he was speaking to someone who had a bit of information. I think Dan Hensley, and he was came up with a couple of stories on that. And I think I thought it was quite interesting, but it didn't really cross my radar until it was I think the point where $5 million was seized. And I think that's when I kind of went, whoa, wait, what is going on here? Like, because that's a lot of money. And these are just your average crypto people who have just been in crypto for a while. They're dedicated to this project. They just love it. It's what they do all the time. It's, it's quite a big part of their lives. And then they've just had $5 million just seized from them. And it's like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And what a crazy story.
It really is.
And
to distinguish it, there are different parts, right? There's Steem is the blockchain, Steemit. There's the Steem token. Can you kind of differentiate those things for us and kind of give us what sort of where it came from and what it was intended to be?
Sure thing. So Steem is the name of the blockchain. It's a Steem blockchain, and it's a custom-built blockchain, and it's designed not so much as to transfer value, which it does, but it's designed to contain information far more than kind of any other blockchain. So it's designed to be the blockchain underpinning a or multiple social networks. So the main one was Steemit. That was the official one started by the founders who also built the Steem blockchain. But obviously other people were able to set up their own social networks. So every time you do a post, it's recorded on the Steem blockchain. And then these social networks tap into the blockchain and use that as to where they get the data from. So this is why it's what goes onto it is immutable, it's censorship resistant, and there's a host of other benefits. For example, because it's a blockchain, because there's value there, you can create a social network where you embed value into it. So if you see a post you like, you can upvote it, and you would spend a little bit of money, and that goes to the person who created the post. And then the way Steemit works is you actually get, if the post does well, you share in the rewards. So it's it's like Facebook, it's like your classic social media, but you have money embedded directly into it. And it you interact with that in many different ways. And I think that's what makes it addictive. And I think the idea of that is brilliant. Like the idea of a social network with just money that's just embedded into it is such a great idea. There's so much potential to be done with that. And that's, I think, why this project has captivated so many people. Because thousands of people use Steem every day, or at least used to. And that's just because they all realized this could be an amazing project. Unfortunately, the project, as it was tainted from its very origins. And I think that eventually a user on Steemit described it as a ticking time bomb. And that eventually exploded and caused the chaos that we saw over the past few months. So I think it's a brilliant idea, but the execution was poor.
And it has its genesis around 2016, but if memory serves here, my skeletal trace memory, it starts to really pick up in the boom year of 2017, the crypto boom year. And I tenuously am a fellow traveler in some what are called anarcho-capitalist circles. And I remember Jeff Berwick, who is the, I guess, spiritual head of Anarchapulco, which is like this big gathering in Mexico of anarchists, which includes a significant chunk of the crypto enthusiast sphere. And he was one of the first that they brought over to bring a sub community into Steem, which I thought was very smart. They would go and get these kind of bigger names, these people with esteem, and bring them over. They would write, post something, and then this whale, this person is basically rewarded. And if memory serves, I think Jeff earned something like $3,000 or $4,000 worth of the Steem token, and came back and posted on Facebook, hey, look, this is the future, and so on and so forth. And that dopamine hit of, money and prestige and clout and all the other stuff kind of worked together. So it begins in 2016. It was really 2017. It's kind of heyday. It's go year.
So I don't really focus on 2017 so much. So essentially, I kind of go back in time 4 years to the origins of Steem. So in 2016, you had Dan Larimer. He was, I chatted to a colleague of his who described him as a brilliant programmer. He was the CTO. It was kind of, arguably the kind of mastermind behind Steem. He'd created this thing called BitShares before, and Steem was like the next iteration of it. He was also working with the CEO, Ned Scott, who was just very enthusiastic and had been trying to work with Dan Larimer for a while. And eventually they kind of met up and hashed out these ideas and then ended up working together on Steem. So in kind of early 2016, they had a small team, they were building it. But they were concerned about one thing. They were concerned about regulations. And this is quite a long time ago, but they were aware that Ripple had been fined by the CFTC for selling XRP. And they were, especially so Down in particular, was concerned that they might get a backlash if they do an ICO. So he came up with a kind of cunning plan, and he actually laid it all out in a document. So the idea is that because mining was seen as an exception, mining was okay, but obviously they wanted a pre-sale or an equivalent to fund the project. So what they essentially did was they launched the blockchain a week early. They mined a whole lot of the tokens without kind of making it that clear or that easy to everyone else how to mine, and basically built up a huge stash of tokens. It was a little bit more complicated because they also staked their tokens, and that ended up giving them like way more tokens. But to cut a long story short, they ended up with 80% of the total supply of Steem tokens, and then they kind of officially launched the project. So that was that kind of fortune was called the Ninja Mine stake, and that fortune was what became the kind of sticking point with the Steem community over the next few years. Because obviously they got really excited about it, but they're also like, wait a minute, these guys have a huge supply. And there's a reason why that's so like worrisome for Steem. And the reason why is because Steem has an on-chain governance system. So if you have Steem tokens, you can convert them into Steem power, which are basically, it's like having voting power. So each Steem token you have, effectively you get one vote. So if you have more Steem tokens, you get more votes. And what you vote for is you vote for the people who are going to run the network. So it's a delegated proof of stake system. So you have 20 people who are elected to run the network, and it's like a constant vote. So you choose to dedicate your Steem power, your voting power towards any one of these 20 people, or kind of people outside of the top 20 that you want to be in the top 20. And you can change your votes at any time. So it's very dynamic. People can suddenly drop out of the top 20 or suddenly go into the top 20. But kind of over time, you kind of stabilize with a kind of solid, top 20 witnesses. But the problem was, as these founders they had more than 50% of the supply of tokens. And if you've got a voting system and someone has more than 50%, then they can control the votes, they control the system. They had the ability to just vote 20 friends in, or 20 just, computer accounts they've just set up. And then suddenly they've got all 20 positions and they have full control of the blockchain. And if they've got full control of the blockchain, then they can do kind of any number of things. They can upgrade it. They can effectively attack it in many ways. So,
and what's kind of meta, just to put a pin right there, in all this is that people are actually writing about this on the Steem platform as it's all going on. So this is a discussion within a discussion about the platform that they're writing on, and there's lots of arguments and issues of governance and delegated proof of stake, as you mentioned, the DPoS, and the implications of pre-mining, I guess, have always sort of been there, but by 2017, 2018, this stuff starts to become like really important, and community members become extremely concerned for the reasons you've outlined, but also the worrisome idea that, I guess, also whales or people who've accumulated tokens could eventually dump them, right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I mean, these issues have been around the Steem blockchain for a long time. As you said, obviously people chatting about it on Steem. And then obviously you get a lot of these kind of issues playing up later again. So obviously with Dan Larimer, I think what was quite interesting was, I think in late 2016, there was I had a quote from him on the Tatiana show where he was saying that one's got to stay committed to a project. You kind of have to see it through long term. And then I think 6 months later, he abandoned Steem.
And he becomes notorious for this. I mean, he'll start a project, he'll get it to a certain point, and then he'll bounce, and he would later go on to EOS or EOS for a quite handsome payday, and I think they got, in the billions in terms of startup, right?
Yeah, so I mean, so in this case, it was quite interesting, just that there was only 6 months between him saying that and between the time he left the project. And then also, obviously with Steem, he went to all of these efforts to not do an ICO. Like Ned Scott apparently wanted to do an ICO, but Larimer convinced him not to do it, to do this kind of pre-mine thing that ended up causing these issues. And then Larimer, a year later, or however many years later, builds EOS and does the world's largest ever token sale, largest ever ICO.
Right.
So I find it strange for him to go from one side where it's like, we must avoid an ICO at all costs, to run the world's biggest ICO. I find that quite interesting.
Well, maybe to enter in a little bit of charity for Dan here, Larimer, is that maybe by the EOS time, some of the regulations had been flattened out a little bit, and it's a little clearer as to what was expected of them in terms of the ICO, and maybe they could navigate a little easier. But I'm just trying to put a little bit of balance in there, but I'm with you.
So I don't think the regulations were much clearer by then. Like the SEC maintains the exact same perspective. I think it was more the fact by then he went, let's just not deal with the US. Like, so the EOS token sale, not only did it not deal with the US, but it actively blocked US citizens from participating. And that was why they had such a small settlement with the SEC, because fundamentally so few kind of US investors were affected. Whereas most ICOs were just open to everyone in the US, and then the SEC has a very strong case to say, well, look, you just sold all these unregistered securities to all of our citizens, which we say you're not allowed to do, and so we're going to fine you for it. Yeah, although EOS obviously had $5 billion to fight the SEC, which I'm sure helps.
Right, and that actually probably isn't that EOS story isn't done by a long shot. Block one and all of that, but that's another story. But
well,
go ahead.
What's interesting about that is obviously, so they're now building Voice, and that's obviously Dan Larimer is involved in that to some degree, and it's interesting to kind of compare Steem and Voice, and to kind of say, is this the kind of the thing he always wanted to build with Steem? Because it's fundamentally it's a social network with embedded cryptocurrencies. It's the same idea. So I think it's interesting to see if Voice succeeds and how it compares to, say what's now Hive, and kind of how those two projects continue in the future. I think that's quite an interesting comparison.
Wow, it's so complex. It's just an amazing cast of characters that you're assembling, and Dan Larimer is just one of them. You've already talked about Ned Scott. Who is Dan Notestein, and how does he factor into your Steem story here?
Yeah, man. So Dan Notestein, he was so they'd worked to but Dan Notestein, he knew Dan Larimer for quite a long time. So he actually so he has a team tech people, and they were contracted out to do a bit of work on Steemit or on Steem, like, but very much kind of before it launched. So they had kind of a bit of expertise. But also, like according to Notestein, Larimer was running out of money. So he asked, hey, can we move back into your basement? Because Notestein had this kind of basement that was set out with a whole lot of desks and computers and a huge server room and everything. So he was like, can we back in there and work on Steemit? So that's what they did. So there was I think they had kind of 3 main core developers who were there a lot of the time. And then Larimer would often kind of come in on Mondays and work out of the basement. And Ned Scott was in New York at the time. And then eventually they kind of moved out to the office space. But so Notestein was it was interesting. So he starts as a very much a background character. So he was kind of aware of Steemit. His team had done a bit of work on Steemit. He kind of knew Larimer. He kind of knew everything that was going on, but he wasn't really involved with it. And then it was only once the blockchain had launched, like a few days later, it was reset, supposedly due to a bug. And at this point, Notestein was like, well, why don't I give mining a try? So he mined a bunch of Steem tokens. And then I think that kind of gradually got him interested, and he kept being aware of the project, and he kept obviously he had a stash of Steem tokens, and not before long he was actively using the Steem blockchain, and he became a witness on the Steem blockchain. So that's one of the when you vote people in to run the blockchain, they're called witnesses, and the top 20 witnesses are the guys who run the blockchain. So he became a witness and eventually became a top 20 witness. And then was actively participating in governance and obviously writing posts on Steemit itself. So he kind of went from this observer to a very kind of integral character in the plot. And then obviously much later on, he was a key character in the creation of Hive. So he kind of has this gradual development until he becomes almost a leading figure, which I don't think he ever intended to be, but kind of ended up becoming.
Coin Fugazi proudly uses read.cash to help distribute our content. Head out to read.cash/@CoinFugazi, all one word, and check out how we're incorporating the platform. Then also check out how people and businesses from all over the world are using crypto as a currency, rather than just speculating, to demonstrate the power of peer-to-peer electronic cash. Tip, comment, blog, join communities, and so much more. That's read.cash. Read.cash.
And so of all the characters you have in this story running through, and they're all colorful and interesting and have lots to say. I guess I'll do it for you. Sort of the villain kind of comes into Steem a little bit later. And his entry into it comes with a ton of baggage, and you could literally write and there will be, you could literally write a book about the next guy. Who's Justin Sun, and how does he factor into Steem and your story?
So I wouldn't portray. I definitely would not portray Sun as a villain in this instant at all.
Okay.
So I think So Sun is the CEO of the Tron Foundation and BitTorrent. He's the founder of the Tron blockchain. So he's kind of got that ecosystem. He obviously then acquired BitTorrent. He acquired the decentralized exchange Poloniex. So he kind of characterized this as kind of his crypto empire, which he's kind of growing. And then he acquired Steemit. And there were a couple of nuanced things that I think are quite important. So for a start, he wasn't aware of the Ninja Mine stake issues. He wasn't aware that this money that he was acquiring came with a huge amount of history and baggage, and that the Steem community felt that money was promised to them, and that there were kind of vague promises in the 2017 roadmap and things like that. He just thought he was, there was an interesting project, and he was like, oh, this is a really interesting thing. This would be a good acquisition for Tron. And he actually, I think, came into it with really good intentions. He wanted to expand Steemit. He wanted to make it bigger. He wanted to market it. There's a call where he made it quite clear that there was a quote in the piece where it's like, I don't want power. I'm here to make money. And he saw it very much as a venture capitalist investment. You know, he kind of buys this product. He puts a lot of money into it. He puts a lot of time into it. He grows it. He makes it bigger. And then eventually he exits, you know, with a profit. And that's a very common strategy in this situation. Mm-hmm. So I definitely think he kind of came in with good intentions in that way. But I think he wasn't properly informed of what he was buying. And then obviously, so I wasn't there in the negotiations, so it's who kind of knows what went on specifically. But he, in one of the calls, they kind of realized that he was never kind of told anything by Ned Scott. And I think his assistant Roy was just like, yeah, we didn't know about any of this. You know, there's nothing in any of the contracts that say that we can't spend the money however we want it. So they were definitely very much surprised when there was such a backlash. They didn't anticipate it at all. I think what is interesting is that Sun definitely wanted to bring it into the Tron ecosystem. And this is definitely a little bit controversial because according to someone with knowledge of the contract, he asked for 30% of the money to be held back until after the Steem token is migrated onto the Tron blockchain. And you can see why he would want to do that, because obviously that would expand his kind of ecosystem. It would expand Tron. It would push up trading volumes, potentially push up the price. The logic from his perspective is sound. There were a lot of questions over whether it would be technically possible because the Steem blockchain is very unique. And a lot of people said it probably wouldn't be possible or would take a huge amount of effort. But the idea kind of makes sense. Although obviously the Steem community was very loyal and they loved their blockchain, they loved their name, and I don't think they wanted it to be transferred. So I think perhaps you could have asked beforehand, what would you guys think if we considered transferring it onto the Tron blockchain?
And we're seeing dynamics like this play out all the time. So there's someone coming in to make a business move under certain preconditions and assumptions, and this would be a nice acquisition. And you've framed it perfectly, by the way. Where I get the villain part from is exactly what you're explaining now, which is that the Steem community rose up, whoever represents that and however you define community, but I'm using it loosely for the sake of our conversation here. The Steem community rises up and really rebels against Sun's acquisition. They kind of see him as a usurper, as someone coming in and throwing his weight around, right?
Yeah, there was definitely... Well, what's interesting is when it first happened, the reaction was a mix. So people were like, they were kind of a bit concerned about Justin Sun, but they were also like optimistic. They were like, wait, this could be huge for Steemit. This could be big. This could put us on the map. Like, they wanted marketing for years, and then now this guy who's great at marketing came along and wanted to invest money and time into it. Like, there was this weird split between, and a lot of people were split between being excited and being kind of nervous about it. So they were very much open to it in the beginning, but there were two things that they were really concerned about. They were concerned about the Ninja Mine stake, whether or not he would use that for voting or spend it on the community as they kind of felt it was promised. And they were concerned about the Tron migration because he announced that, and they were all surprised. They were like, "Oh, we don't want this to happen. We don't think this is technically possible." So those were like the two biggest concerns. So a lot of the Steem community reached out to Tron, but the one issue there was they didn't get many responses back. They found it hard to get any clear answers. There was an AMA, but the AMA wasn't really an AMA where you ask him everything. It was more like they picked a couple of random questions, and they didn't really address the issues. I think they addressed the Ninja Mine stake. It was like, we have no plans to vote with our tokens for now, and that like little "for now" just really like unnerved the community. So the reaction was definitely mixed at first, but I think what they were frustrated at was that they couldn't. They had so many questions, and they felt the questions weren't getting answered, and so this was what led to the next bit where the Steem community decided to freeze his tokens. So this is why I don't like the characterization of like good guys and bad guys in this case, because I think it's a very complicated thing, and you can see it from both angles. Obviously, he kind of acquires the thing in secret, but he's unaware of a lot of the issues. But then the Steem community kind of makes the first move in freezing his tokens, and then he reacts. And then by that point, you just have this war, and once war starts, it just kind of keeps raging.
It almost becomes self-perpetuating, right?
Yeah, for sure. But the question of who started it's a judgment call, and usually it depends whoever side you're on is. You'll say the other one started it. It was kind of a lot of misunderstandings, and then a preemptive strike, and then retaliation, and then you've got this war. But in
Sun's defense, Justin Sun's defense, Steem wasn't really doing much at the time. I mean, it had kind of had its bell curve sort of parabolic run, and was kind of lingering, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it was still an active community, and the people who were using it loved it, and they a lot of them were very dedicated and weren't going away. So I don't know if that's like a justification. But he definitely came in wanting to make it a lot bigger and to expand it and bring some new energy.
So just as they're Dan's, Notestein, and Larimer, there's a couple of sons. Who's Ciara's son?
So Ciara's son, she's the vice president at Huobi, a crypto exchange. So I chatted to her for a bit. She was, she basically, so after the takeover, after Justin Sun's assets were frozen, where he wasn't able to vote for them, to use them for governance voting, or he couldn't even move the coins, of which the reasoning for that was they wanted to kind of hold the assets while this dispute played out. But then he decided to retaliate. He decided to get his assets back. So he reached out to a few exchanges, including Huobi, and he reached out to their tech team and said there was like these hackers were threatening to kind of hurt the Steem blockchain. Right. And apparently, according to Huobi, this is quite a common occurrence. It's quite common for the teams to reach out and say, "Hey, we've got a problem. Can you help us with this?" Which I was a little bit concerned about. I mean, I was like, "How many times have you done this in the past few years?" Because that's not, I don't think, being that well reported that happens that often. But yeah, so they said it was standard procedure. They helped out, and I think Ciara's son, basically, she said she was in New York at the time, then flying back to London. And she said that she only really found out after the kind of journalists were phoning her up and being like, "Hey, what happened? Why did you help him in this?" And then she kind of found out everything that was going on. And then Huobi made quite swift moves to kind of get stop staking the coins, to take them off the voting governance system. And she also said that they don't think that any of their customers' assets were used. As in, they have a pool of Steem tokens, and they said that they think only the kind of spare tokens that they have were used in this situation. They didn't use their customers' tokens.
Wow, what a mess! And
it's this kind of misunderstanding to the next bit of lack of communication. It's incredible how it all played out.
You can see how all these moving parts are working together to create just a complete implosion here. And so then we get another Dan in the story, Dan Hensley. He's got kind of an interesting take in that he doesn't have the cachet of a Dan Larimer or a Justin Sun. How does he factor in?
Yeah, so Dan's a very passionate guy. So he kind of lives over in Baja, Mexico. Yeah, with this piece, I was very much struggling for imagery because the whole thing took place on the blockchain. So I even included an image of his kind of waterfront, seafront view, just to kind of break up the story, which I thought I was just like, it's just wildly unrelated, but I'm going to stick it in just to kind of break up the story, and it seemed to work. But yeah, so so he was actually a bit on the fence for quite a long time. So he believed that the situation could be worked out. He has a platform called ThreeSpeak, which ran on Steem and was one of a later project to kind of move to Hive. He was very much tried to negotiate. He was in negotiations with Tron representatives for a long time. He was doing a lot of back channeling. He was constantly kind of trying to work towards this win-win situation. He spoke to Justin quite a bit. He participated in the calls. He was very kind of active, and he was very optimistic in trying to resolve the situation. A lot of the community, especially the witnesses, Hensley wasn't a witness. A lot of the witnesses just believed the situation was unresolvable, that it was lost, that they had to like do something. Whereas Hensley had a very different attitude. He kind of really wanted to make it work if it was at all possible, until there was a point in the kind of voting war when they were trying to use as much STEEM tokens as they could to control the top 20 witnesses, to control the blockchain, whereas and each side were buying more tokens. There was this big kind of voting war in the middle. And it was at the end of that where somehow Sun got sent a huge amount of tokens from Binance, although it's unclear how he was able to do that. But he got this huge amount of tokens on Binance when it was like really difficult to buy any STEEM tokens anywhere else, because they're all locked up on these exchanges. You know, Binance has locked up all its STEEM tokens, including, ironically, Dan said about 1 million of his STEEM tokens were locked up on Binance. So they were even being used to vote against him, which is a pretty crazy idea that, you know, did Dan give permission to Binance to use his tokens for governance in that way, that it ended up losing him millions of dollars? Like, that's a really interesting dynamic there. And a kind of a question for the role of crypto exchanges. The
exchange part of it is something that I think very few have paid attention to, and I think that too will have an extremely long-lasting implications for the cryptocurrency space. So that leads perfectly into CZ, Changpeng Zhao, and Binance. Can you flesh out a little bit of his role? Because he seemed to be a little blindsided as well by the pushback and the accusations of, you know, whereas in the first case with Ciara saying, oh no, there weren't, you know, our customers' tokens being used, it does appear that that was the case in the instance of Binance and CZ, right?
Yeah, so I actually lost my train of thought before. I was going to finish by saying that Dan, at the end of the voting war, when he saw those tokens go to Sun, he realized he lost the war. That was the kind of moment for him where he eventually gave up. He was like, that's it. Like, he was kind of going to keep on fighting, but that was the point. He knew it was over. And then eventually kind of jumped onto Hive when Hive was built. So in terms of CZ, he as you said, CEO of Binance, he's obviously knows crypto industry pretty well, but you know, they have loads of tokens on Binance. It's very hard for them to keep on track of every single token. I didn't speak to him about this, so I only know so much about his kind of involvement with that. I saw obviously his tweet threads. He very much said that he was aware, I think, but that wanted to find out more about it afterwards. Or no, I think he said he wasn't involved, and then now he has to get involved. Although some other reports kind of dispute that. But yeah, and then he just wanted to find out what was going on. He was a bit confused because Justin sent him a GitHub link with like a proposal to delete coins from like Binance, which like never would have been implemented. And there's a lot of
just sidebar on Justin Sun and CZ, they have at least a chummy relationship, social media wise. There were some issues with reporting at one of your rivals, and the two were being sort of tongue in cheek and talking about some kind of fun to battle journalists who were going after them and these sorts of things. So CZ and Justin have kind of a simpatico relationship at times, even though they're ostensibly, exchange, I guess now, exchange and token rivals, right?
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed Justin at ConsenSys a year ago, and actually I asked him about his relationship with CZ, and he said they were a fairly good friends. I'm trying to. It was a long time ago. I can't remember exactly what he said, but like they know each other. I think they talk now and again. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to kind of comment on that relationship because obviously I don't know it too well.
But they come together again under some of the issues with Steem, right? And Binance gets caught up in some of the community ire.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely seem to kind of be on the same vibe, especially on social media. I mean, you say about what's happened before. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to know how much they're working together on this. Yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts here. There's also some anonymous community members who come up and start making their presence known, and I find that super interesting. So you have people who have used their reputations, like the Dan Hensleys, like the Justin Suns, the CZs, the Ned Scotts, the Dan Larimers, all those guys. But they're also a very crypto, very online phenomenon of these rather anonymous figures who come in. Who's Robin Hood, and how does that factor in?
Oh, okay. I thought you meant more like the pseudonymous kind of people on Steem itself. So Robin Hood. Well, this is more. Okay, so for context, towards the end of it, the Steem, a lot of the community had moved to Hive, but as they were still kind of moving their Steem tokens across, they obviously have to. When you take Steem tokens off the government system, it takes 13 weeks, and you get a 13th every week. So they were slowly moving across to Hive, but they still had a lot of Steem tokens left on Steem. And then the new kind of Steem witnesses decided to seize $5 million of those tokens, including a whole load of money from two accounts that hadn't been active for many years, which is pretty crazy because the reason they gave was that there was illegal activity or something, and it was odd to see someone who hadn't engaged for several years to have their tokens seized for supposed illegal activity. And yeah, so so that money got seized, and then the moment that the money, because they announced when it would happen, and then it happened on the exact time, but the moment the money went to the designated account, about a minute later, suddenly it just got moved to another account. It got sent to Bittrex, another crypto exchange, and everyone was like, "Whoa, what happened? Why did it just do that?" Everyone on both sides. And the person who did it, who remains unknown to this day, posted on the blockchain, did a message to Justin Sun saying stealing is bad. He put a message to Bittrex saying, "Can you, these coins belong to their rightful owners, can you return them please?" And then he posted on Steemit a picture of Robin Hood being like, referring to himself, being like, "I'm the Robin Hood, I've saved the day." And also, I think, answered a question. Someone said, "Who would play you if this was a movie?" He said, Zayn Malik or something. I'd have to check. It's in the article. From Mr. Robot, I think. This is like
right.
Huh? Remy Malek. I haven't seen it, so.
He would go on to play Freddie Mercury in the biopic of Queen.
Yeah. So that money was sent to Bittrex, kind of everyone's surprise. And then Bittrex was initially like, well, we're not going to return it back to the original guys. We're going to honor the decision made on the blockchain. Whether the blockchain's compromised or not, we're going to give it back we're going to just agree with whatever the blockchain says, kind of code is law kind of mentality.
Sure.
And the Steem community were like, "No, give us the tokens back, please." Because, it's a lot of money. And also for Dan Notestein, he runs a crypto exchange called Block Trades, and it was his Block Trades account that was seized. So he was trying to, he runs an important service where it's like creating new accounts on Steem and exchanging money, and suddenly it's like having your business account blocked and your money taken. That's a nightmare for any kind of business person. So it was a lot of complications, and there was a lot of money at stake. So obviously they wanted the money back. So Notestein, Hensley, and others actually launched a lawsuit against Bittrex to try and get their money back, which I wrote a separate article on that. Yeah, and kind of that lawsuit's ongoing. The money's kind of still there. It's actually quite interesting. Yeah, so in the lawsuit, I think what they would normally do is this money would get transferred to the court, and the court would look after the money until the kind of dispute is over. But in this case, they're saying the money at the moment is kept within a big pool at Bittrex. It's like within a pool, and you can't separate the money out from the pool. But they're like, if this money is transferred in a single transaction to the court, or a court-appointed like wallet, then, for example, the people controlling the Steem blockchain could then seize it again. So that's why they don't want that to happen. They're like, let Bittrex look after it for now, mixed up with all their exchange funds. And then, obviously, if we win, we would then just ask for that money to be transferred. So yeah, that the lawsuit's still in motion. And that's kind of where that's sitting at.
Wow. What a saga. And there's a tendency, especially in the podcast world, to kind of wrap this up in a neat little bow. But there's still some loose ends that are out there, and this is kind of an ongoing story that certainly hasn't ended. Let's finish up here with kind of your takeaways. Like what do you think the implications are? Which I realize is kind of a vague and also very potentially long answered question. But what do you basically think the implications are for the Steem story and for the crypto ecosystem going forward?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a key one is delegated proof of stake. Obviously, you've got a lot of people, Bitcoiners, they think that's the exact right way of doing things. You've got people experimenting a bit more with Ethereum, and then you've also got kind of DPoS, which a lot of people kind of criticize because you can get cartels and things like that. And I think this is a very interesting examination of whether the system works. What happens if someone has more than 50% of the coins? And I think it's not a direct analysis of DPoS, because you might have a system where all the money was handed out equally from the beginning and then it stays equally distributed. Whereas this is a relatively unique case where 80% of the funds were in one person's hands or two people's hands. So I think definitely it's a very interesting experiment on a delegated proof of stake system when you have someone controlling a large amount of funds, and to see how it works in that case. I also think what's quite interesting is the 20 witnesses just decided to freeze Sun's funds in the beginning. And I thought that was interesting because they did that in a private Slack channel. So it's just 20 guys in the Slack channel. I think there were some other community members in the channel as well, but fundamentally that's effectively like a cartel making a decision, 20 people making a decision over the whole blockchain. And obviously these guys love the Steem blockchain. They wanted to do everything for it. But if, for example, they were bad actors and they did decide to do something nefarious, they would be able to do so. So I think that's quite an interesting, I think it was interesting what happened there. And it'd be interesting to discuss whether that was the right thing to do or whether they should have been more public about it. Obviously, it's challenging because if they were public, then some would have known what they were going to do, and he may have tried to move his funds, or he may have taken over the blockchain earlier. So it's a very tricky, the whole thing's very tricky situation on both sides, but definitely a really interesting issue on DPoS. I think the role of the crypto exchanges is important. I think that's definitely something that should be evaluated. Crypto exchanges have definitely kind of had the liberty to do whatever they want to do, and they have a lot of power in this industry. And I think it would be interesting to see them take more responsibility for their actions, and to realize that they are having a big impact on the crypto space. I mean, we know that listings have had a big impact, but it's kind of, they're a private business. They should be allowed to list who they want. But in this case, getting involved in governments, voting and things like that, it's a lot more complex, and it's a lot more getting involved in the industry. I think what would be cool is if, say, you had tokens on Binance, if you were then able to vote on Binance, they had a really simple voting system. That would be cool, but obviously that would, be up to them or another exchange to implement. But I think that would be pretty interesting. I mean, you see some exchanges do, you get rewards if you hold like Tezos or like staking tokens. I think that's a really good start, because it's then very user friendly and very easy to get rewards. So yeah, DPoS, kind of the role of crypto exchanges, Those are kind of the two main issues I think from this. Also a little bit kind of ICOs, how to run an ICO is important. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story. There's kind of things from all angles. I mean, the quote that I absolutely loved was Ari Paul saying that this is probably the most important thing happening in crypto now. And I think he was totally right. It's just an amazing experiment, and seeing what happens. And there's a hell of a lot of money at stake. So it has real ramifications in the real world. Even Eric Wall, he was like, I'm not a fan of Steem. He's very much a Bitcoiner. But he was just like, but this is super interesting. It's just such a crazy story. And that's just why I needed to document it in just kind of one article. And that's what I did.
Yeah, and thanks to you and Decrypt, we are able to follow it, make sense of it, put all the characters and players in order. And again, I think this is far from being over. So everybody get out to decrypt.co. Make sure you follow Tim Copeland. Tim, how can they follow you, keep up with your work and all things Tim Copeland?
So I'm on Twitter, Tim C. Copeland. Yeah, I mean, we also have like a Telegram channel if you want to see our latest Decrypt stories. I mean, we now have the app if you want to get stories directly to you. I don't know about me personally. I'm just one cog in the machine. I think Twitter is the kind of best way to get my random musings and my shower thoughts, if that's what you really want.
Very cool. Well, you have given me way too much time, and I really appreciate the insight. The journalism is top notch, and you guys are setting a new standard, and I'm definitely rooting for you. Thanks again, man, so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anytime.